Joining me now, Delaware Democratic Senator Chris Coons, who was at the NATO summit as well. Welcome back to the show. It's good to have you.
Thanks. Great to be on with you, Shannon.
Okay, so let's start here. There's now a commitment from just about every member nation to get to 5% of their GDP for defense spending. The Secretary General gives the president credit. There was this text message between the two that the president released, and the Secretary General said he was fine with that. It said this: Donald, you have driven us to a really, really important moment for America and Europe and the world. You will achieve something no American president in decades could get done. Europe is going to pay in a big way, as they should, and it will be your win. Now, I know you're concerned about the way some of that money will be spent moving forward, but do you give him the win?
Absolutely. I think this was a successful NATO summit from every perspective. Having President Trump recommit to Article 5, having our European allies, our transatlantic allies come together and commit to significant increased investment in their security is positive from every perspective. What I have said is we need to make sure those funds are spent wisely, that we coordinate well. Look, frankly, part of what drove this was also Putin's aggression against Ukraine. We stand united in supporting Ukraine's fight for freedom. And what I heard about the meeting between President Zelensky and President Trump was encouraging as well. Overall, I thought it was a big success, the NATO summit.
Did you meet with President Zelensky as well?
I did.
Can you tell us much about that meeting and that conversation?
He was upbeat and positive. He's asking not for American funding for more weapons, but for the ability to buy more American weapons, given that Europeans are funding their next round of weapons acquisition. He really needs air defense because Putin's Russia continues to hammer civilian targets within Ukraine, schools and hospitals and apartment buildings, and they're striking military targets. They just pulled off a spectacular strike deep inside Russia. President Trump's called for a ceasefire. President Zelensky has agreed. President Putin is not agreeing. He's continuing to strike deep into Ukraine, and I hope that President Trump will realize that Putin's playing him and that he needs to come down harder on Russia. Senators Graham and Blumenthal have a sanctions bill that I hope we will take up and pass next week.
Okay, so before we leave NATO, I want to talk too about the Secretary General praising President Trump over the situation with Israel, with Iran. Of course, while you guys were there, that was just playing out, the aftermath of that. Here is the Secretary General with praise for those strikes.
I just want to recognize your decisive action on Iran.
Thank you.
You are a man of strength, but you're also a man of peace. And the fact that you are now also successful in getting this ceasefire done between Israel and Iran, I really want to commend you for that.
Thank you very much.
And I think this is important for the whole world.
I actually referred to him as Daddy at one point, saying he's the one who got the two kids to stop fighting in the back seat. How was that playing out in NATO? Because we didn't know. I mean, obviously there was a little bit of retaliation from Iran. It seemed to be telegraphed to us in advance. Things seem quiet for now.
Well, Shannon, let's start just by being prayerfully grateful that American servicemen and women at Al Udeid Air Base and throughout the Middle East were not harmed, were not struck. No Americans were killed in the Iranian response to this. I did think his use of the term daddy was a little odd. But frankly, Secretary General Rutte, who leads NATO, I think showed deft handling of the summit overall. And frankly, the fact that the strikes have significantly degraded Iran's enrichment capabilities and facilities is a positive. What I'm very concerned about, and so are many of my colleagues, is what comes next, not knowing what's the path forward for making sure that Iran's nuclear enrichment program does not continue to allow them to race towards a bomb, which may be what they do now.
So Bret Stephens, writing about this over at the New York Times, called this decision to strike, he called it courageous. He writes this: Trump's responsibility was to deny Iran's leaders the capabilities that would have allowed them the chance to change their minds at will to devastating effect. Amid uncertainty, the president acted before it was too late. It is the essence of statesmanship. The IAEA made it clear that Iran was in violation of a number of agreements. You've talked about the fact that they were enriching far beyond what you would use for civilian non-weapons use. So in your opinion, how much longer should we have waited?
So, Shannon, the key thing we don't know now is what's happened to the 900 pounds of highly enriched uranium. It's entirely possible that Iran moved it outside these sites. It would fit in the back of an F-150 pickup truck. And there are open source pictures of trucks pulling up to two of these facilities and leaving afterwards. So,
and the White House says they think that that was, in their assessment, concrete being poured or things to make that a tougher target to penetrate. But
and that may be. But what I think the administration has to do next is come forward to Congress with the most complete picture our intelligence community can give us of what happened, of what's going to happen next, and of what their strategy is. I'll just note that President Trump, by press accounts, is now moving towards negotiation and offering Iran a deal that looks somewhat similar to the Iran deal that was offered by Obama. Tens of billions of dollars of incentives and reduced sanctions in exchange for abandoning their nuclear program.
So let's talk about that, because your colleague, Lindsey Graham, you mentioned this sanctions package he's got with respect to Ukraine and Russia, very involved in foreign policy. He says that though the White House is open to these talks with Iran, there's got to be one specific precondition. Here's what he says.
If you don't get a commitment up front that Iran from this day forward abandons its stated desire to wipe out Israel, if they're not willing to recognize the Jewish state, you're wasting your time.
All right, so this is a government that chants death to Israel.
Yes,
are we
and death to America.
And, of course, death to America. Are we to expect that they are a valid, legit negotiating partner if they can't come to the table and say, okay, we recognize Israel has at least the right to existence?
That should be one of the key issues on the table. Look, when the IAEA said that they no longer were following their non-proliferation treaty obligations, that meant that what they've long said was their position. Iran claims to have a right to enrich. They've abandoned that. They've abandoned those commitments. And you're right. The fact that for decades they've said we want to eliminate Israel from the face of the earth is what makes them uniquely dangerous as a country with a nuclear program.
What do you make of the leak? I mean, the FBI is now investigating the leak that had this initial low confidence estimate out there. The White House speculates it may have come from a lawmaker. What do you think should happen to that leaker?
Look, all of us need to be committed to protecting sensitive and classified information. Administrations, both Democrat and Republican, have struggled to make sure that leaks within the administration or in Congress don't happen. I do think that just a few months ago there was an alarming incident where the National Security Advisor and Secretary of Defense were trading over Signal, an unsecure app, details about an imminent strike on the Houthis. So I think we should be measured and wait for the intelligence to come out about exactly who leaked what here before any action's taken.
All right, another big headline this week for your party was about the Democratic mayoral primary in New York City. So a lot of attention. The man who won, Zohran Mamdani. We're going to scroll some things on our screen that have been attributed to him that he's publicly embraced. He's been described as anti-Semitic, anti-law enforcement. He wants to banish private health insurance, guns, and prisons. He says no cooperation with ICE, and the list goes on. Does he speak for you as a Democrat? Is he welcome in your party as kind of a standard bearer of potentially the largest?
I don't share any of the positions that you just described. But look, before we conclude, we can't mistake what is about to happen here and what I think that has in common with voters in New York. Voters in New York, I think, were principally moved by concerns about costs of housing, costs of groceries, costs of health care. President Trump's campaign was partly successful because he said he would reduce costs. But the big and not very beautiful bill that we are about to vote on here in the Senate is going to cut $900 billion out of Medicaid, is going to throw, according to the Congressional Budget Office, there is not that much waste in Medicaid.
You heard Senator Banks. He said it's people who don't belong on this. And he says they're going to force a vote on whether people who are in this country illegally should be getting Medicaid benefits. How will you vote on that amendment?
And Senator Banks knows that Medicaid is not available. The federal funding under Medicaid does not go to people who are not American citizens.
It's not supposed to.
There are states that are using their state funding to provide health care for people who are undocumented. But let's be clear. Those cuts are not about throwing people off of Medicaid who are not here legally. They are about imposing more and more requirements on the beneficiaries of Medicaid. Let me put it simply this way. I had 36 nurses from Delaware visit me this week. These are folks who care for seniors in nursing homes, for disabled children, for newborns, and they begged me to vote against this bill because they know it will hurt their ability to deliver needed health care for tens of thousands of Delawareans. Don't believe me. Listen to Senator Tom Tillis. He's been saying loudly, this bill is a bad deal for the middle class. It'll raise health care costs and throw millions off of needed health care.
Well, the bell chiming tells us that our time is up. Senator, we appreciate you coming by. We'll watch as this plays out all week and where those policy fights continue. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Shannon.